16 starts and sits at each position for this Thanksgiving weekend. We got quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends today, Ty. We are a day early because we don't want to put this out on Thanksgiving. We want to give you some starts and sits that are going to play on Thursday and Friday as well. So we are making sure that you have all the information you needed this week, and that's why we're only at 2 episodes. But Ty, why don't you kick us off with your quarterback start of the week?
Yeah, probably the more obvious name between the two of us here. It's Baker Mayfield. The Mike Evans return is huge here. He's finished as a top 10 QB in 8 weeks this year. So the ceiling for top 10 finishes is now back with Mike Evans in the fold. Baker gets Carolina this week, and if you were to take a look at the stats, like you would see that Carolina is actually allowing the 11th fewest passing yards per game in the last month, which is like surprising because you're like Carolina, that feels like it's an easy matchup, and I'm just here to tell you that it is. Okay, don't buy into the stat right there because they in that last month they played the Saints. Derek Carr threw for 236, and they played Daniel Jones and the Giants in Germany, and Danny Dimes only threw for 190. Before New Orleans, they played Bo Nix, and he threw for 284, and they played Mahomes this past Sunday, and he threw for 269 on him. Baker is definitely closer to Bo Nix and Mahomes in terms of fantasy caliber than Derek Carr and Danny Dimes. So if Carolina keeps it as close as they did against Kansas City, it's only better for Baker. But even if it's a blowout, I think Baker can definitely crack top 10 again this week.
Yeah, you look at before Mike Evans and Chris Godwin got hurt in that Baltimore game, since from week 4 to when they got hurt in week 7, his yards per attempt, Baker, 7.4, 7.5, 9.0, 8.2. Then week 8 through 10, where he's playing with neither of them, it goes down to 6.6, 6.5, 4.0. So it's just those dinks and dumps over and over. And then it comes back against the Giants with Mike Evans back, and it's back up to 9.8. And last week, you look at he had 18.7 fantasy points and didn't throw a passing touchdown. I'm going to be honest, the way Baker is playing, I don't think that holds up, but I do think we could see another 24 for 30 for 294 passing yards against this Carolina offense. So I completely agree there with Baker Mayfield. My guy, I'll admit, it's a little grosser. It's for those of us who are, we're at the bottom of the barrel for our quarterbacks. We need to throw someone in there. And I'm going with Drake May. And I understand some of you are like, why would I ever? But Indianapolis right now is giving up the 6th most passing yards per game. And Drake May has thrown the ball 33 plus times in all but one healthy game, meaning he's getting the ball out. And, we talk about, like we were just talking about Baker Mayfield. He hasn't thrown the ball for over 33 times in any of his last 3 games. So we see Drake May getting the ball out. We see him being efficient. But Drake May's also been a sneaky rusher this season. He's ran for over 25 yards in all but one game so far, and he's just adding that extra on the ground. It really, for him, is going to come down to can he score 2 touchdowns this week? Right? That if he does, he's going to be in that 18-point range. You're going to be very happy. But on the season right now, since he took over week 6, he's had 21, 20, 19 points. He's always, been double digits, which obviously for a quarterback, you're not like, oh yeah, he got me 14, woohoo. But it's, he's not killing you on a week either. So I think Drake May's got a good enough matchup. I think we've seen on the ground is, if you're got a Brock Purdy, right? Who, spoiler, sorry, Ty, we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Jeez.
But, if you get to Sunday and all of a sudden it's like, even though San Francisco's been saying, hey, he's going to play, and he doesn't, Drake May is the guy I would pivot to.
Yeah, I mean, ever since Drake May took over the starting job in New England, he is second of all quarterbacks in rushing yards. Like, he has an advantage that some of these other kind of lower, tier quarterbacks do not have, right? I'm talking about the Matthew Staffords of the world, the Jared Goffs of the world, CJ Stroud, for how bad it's been for CJ Stroud this year, right? Like, Drake May has a sneaky advantage over all of those guys. So I would be willing to, I take a shot on Drake May. Now, the other thing is too, like, since every team is playing, we do have a pretty set, like, top 12 QBs at this point in the year that you probably should be playing. But again, like if you're in this like 14-man league, in deeper leagues, super flex, like you are absolutely firing up Drake May this week, because that Indy matchup is also a really, really good matchup. They are top 10 in the last month in pass yards per attempt. So Drake May, favorable matchup with his rushing upside. There is a path to top 15 production from Drake May this week.
Yeah. Before our QB sits real quick, we just want to remind you over here on YouTube, we're over 2,000. We're over 2,100. We're pushing 2,200 subscribers. We want to make sure that you join the fellowship with us, that you are following along. We are not stopping, right? We're hitting Thanksgiving in stride. We're coming back three videos a week. So we just want to make sure you hit that subscribe button for us there.
Hey, no, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, we are super, super thankful for all of you that are subscribed. And so if you are not a part of that and you want us to be thankful for you, you should subscribe.
100%. 100%, Ty. All right, I kind of spoiled your QB sit. It is Brock Purdy. But Ty, I got to say, Brock Purdy's been red hot before he got hurt. 24, 20, 26, 23, 19 fantasy points in his last 5 weeks. So is it just a shoulder injury, or is there more to you wanting to sit Brock Purdy?
I think a big component of this is the shoulder injury, but the other side of this is the matchup that he has going into Buffalo, right? Buffalo at home this year, one of the stingiest pass defenses in the league, allowing the 6th fewest passing yards, the lowest passing yards per attempt at home, right? And you look at some of, since really week 6 for Brock Purdy, right? 24.1, 20.2, 26, 23.8, 19.4, obviously missed week 12 because of his injury. But some of those matchups are very favorable matchups for Brock Purdy, right? We're talking about Seattle, we're talking about Dallas, we're talking about Tampa, Seattle again. This is a whole nother beast in Buffalo on the road. And for all the struggles that we see with San Francisco, I'm just not willing to take the bet on Brock Purdy this week.
Yeah, you talk about it. Buffalo playing well at home, allowing just exactly 200 passing yards per game this season to quarterbacks. It's just not something that you really want to deal with, especially knowing, hey, this shoulder injury held him out a week, and they were already kind of questioning it beforehand. So if he does go, how much does it actually hamper him? And you were talking about it. There are a lot of really good quarterbacks right now. So unless you really don't have a pivot, this is the week to pivot off Brock Purdy. Because you know what? Let's say he's 100%. Let's say he lights it up and gives you 20. Right. That is always going to be an outcome. But you're kind of, if you're playing the odds, it does feel like in a tough matchup with the injury, the odds are, hey, he's probably not going to be a QB1 on the week. Find a way to pivot out of that. So I would agree with you there. My guy is Tua Tagovailoa. He is also playing an extremely stingy Packers defense at home. The Green Bay Packers are number 1 against fantasy quarterbacks and fantasy wide receivers at home this week or this season. They've just been slowing everybody down. And the thing about Tua and what it's always come down to for him is he is completely a pocket passer. Right? There is no rushing upside with Tua. I talked about this with Matthew Stafford as my sit of the week last week. Is he needs multiple touchdowns and he needs 250 plus yards. Well, in his last 2 seasons, in games outside under 50 degrees in temperature, he's averaging 254 passing yards, 1.5 touchdowns, and 1.8 interceptions per game. Right? I mean, he's averaging more picks than he is touchdowns. So it's something that I just don't really want to get involved in. I think at this point, you've had somebody other than Tua starting in your quarterback position. So you should have a pivot at this point if you're rostering Tua. And I would just move away because, again, the matchup just stinks. And it's in an environment where we know Tua historically hasn't been the greatest.
This is a very interesting. This game I find to be the most intriguing of the week, not just because of the whole weather narrative for Miami, but the fact is that since Tua returned from his concussion, Miami is first in EPA per dropback. And now you match that with one of the best home defenses against the pass, right? Green Bay over the last month have allowed only 2 passing touchdowns, right? So for a guy, like you said, Cam, for Tua with no rushing upside, you're banking on you're banking on touchdowns because he could throw for 300 yards, but if he doesn't throw any touchdowns, it's kind of it's a quiet 300 then, right? So if he can't throw touchdowns, again, Tua, for as good as he's been, Drake May, I think I would pivot right to Drake May just because of his rushing upside and a better matchup.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, even in week 1 for Tua, he threw for 338 yards, and yet he still finished right at quarterback 10. So, right, I mean, a fantastic game, but he only had 1 touchdown. So that's my worry, just in a stingy matchup. Let's move on to our running back starts. In tag, we got 2 guys who've moved from the backup role to start the year to now the starting role. So I'll let you kick it off with your running back start.
I am rolling with Rico Dowdle this week. The clear lead back in Dallas. Now, just this past Sunday, he played 40 snaps to Ezekiel Elliott's 13, and he's been averaging 41 to 42 snaps a game the last month to Zeke's 17. And on Sunday, Rico got 19 rushing attempts for 86 yards with 3 receptions instead. Because of Apocalypse, he finished as a running back 19 on the week, even though it was 10 fantasy points because he also lost a fumble as well. But you know what? Hey, you know what? It's top 20 still. It's still a top 20 finish. He gets the Giants this week, okay? This is the matchup to pick on for any running back, right? Giants are allowing the 7th most yards per carry the last month, 3rd in rushing yards per game as well. So with his rushing volume, ever since he came back from his injury right out of the bye, actually, it wasn't an injury. He was sick. Let me correct that. He was sick. So once he came back from that, comments can be. yeah. Jeez, sorry about that. So yeah, since returning from his sickness, he's been the running back 22, in usage. So the volume, the usage, and a Tony Pollard-esque receiving workload as well, right? We're mixing in 2, 3, 4 receptions. Rico is a great play this week, and I'm very intrigued to play him over both of our sits this week.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Cooper Rush has been playing pretty well as of the last couple of weeks, right? 354. And, well, okay, I should say playing
it's
well
been great fantasy.
Yes, in terms of being able to move the ball for his team, which is what Rico needed. Which is the worry, with like a Tyrone Tracy in New York is, hey, they're not moving the ball really. Well, he's had 354 and 247, yards back-to-back weeks, which is putting Rico Dowdle in spots where he could score touchdowns. That was the worry with Rico, is all of a sudden, hey, he gets this lead back role, but he's not going to score touchdowns. This week against the Giants, he could find that end zone, and then you add in had PPR upside as well. I really like Rico Dowdle for sure this week. Mine is, a little bit easier. I'm just riding a hot hand here, and I'm going with Bucky Irving. I'm switching it from my quarterback start where I got Gross. This one I think is a little easier. He's playing Carolina. That should be all I need to tell you. But they are giving up 160 rushing yards over the last 4 games, and they are also giving up a league high 42% of their carries have gone for over 5+ yards. So it's pretty much 50-50 shot if he's going to get 5 yards of carry, which he's already doing anyways. And Bucky's been playing well. So he's got a great matchup, and he's been playing well. He's running back 12 since week 7. We saw him for the first time out snap Rachaad White last week. He had 6 targets to Rachaad White's 1. So he looked very good last week. 7.5 points per game coming up from receiving work on top of what he's been doing rushing the ball. So even though he's only seeing 12 to 15 rush attempts, when you're adding an extra 7.5 points, from the receiving game, that's huge. And then if he finds the end zone, we see a big week like we saw last week where he had 27. So yeah, I mean, I think any running back against Carolina right now is a smash start, but especially one that's been red hot like Bucky Irving.
Yeah, the receiving work is huge for Bucky, right? And with his efficiency on the ground, we talked about him yesterday in our risers and fallers from week 12. The dude is insanely efficient with his touches as well. He does not go down at all either. I believe it was 6th in missed tackles force per attempt and 2nd in yards after contact, vice versa, whatever it is. The dude is really good, right? And so now you get a really, really, really juicy matchup against Carolina. There is absolutely no reason why Bucky should be on your bench this week.
Yeah, no, I agree. And our running back sits, Ty. Yours is a tough one because we want him to be good. We do. But you just can't believe it. So who's your running back set?
It's Javonte Williams. This kind of feels like for those of you that have been around for a minute here on the podcast, you know that like we were very much like the DeAndre Swift stands before he got traded to Philly, right? We were like, why does he not get on the field in Detroit? Javonte feels like DeAndre Swift 2.0 here because we're like, we know the talent of Javonte Williams. But for whatever reason, Sean Payne's like, nah, I really want Audric Estime to be a guy. I really want Jaleel McLaughlin to be a guy. You can't trust Javonte Williams at this point. I will say, you were a better running back than Javonte Williams last week. You had 0 rushing attempts. Javonte had 8, but guess what? You had 0 rushing yards, and Javonte had -2. Again, with how much they rely on a hot hand in this backfield, it's way too unpredictable. I don't care about the matchup this week against Cleveland. There are so many better options than Javonte that do not give you as big of a headache as Javonte does.
Yeah, it's just, you just never know. I mean, he's had weeks with 8, 5, 6, 1, 8, 9 carries, and he's also had weeks with 17, 14, 16. And so it's like, yeah, you can play the, roulette with it a little bit and be like, is this the week? But why would you do that when the upside is so limited anyways? Right. We did see 18 points against Atlanta and 26 against New Orleans. But that's not, those are outlier weeks. Those are him scoring multiple touchdowns. Those are the only 2 games he's scored touchdowns in. So yeah, I just don't want anything to do with it. I agree. I just stay far away unless, McLaughlin and Estime both get hurt. You probably should be staying away from him in most games moving forward. My guy, I'm going back to the same running back sit as last week. I'm going back to DeAndre Swift. And we saw what happens when he plays against a really good rushing defense in Minnesota. 13 carries for 30 yards. This week he gets Detroit in Detroit, and Detroit is giving up the 5th fewest rushing yards per game, including holding Jonathan Taylor to 11 carries for 35 yards last week. Now, I know we had a comment on our last YouTube video where we had somebody calling to sit Jonathan Taylor and start Tyler Goodson. But Jonathan Taylor is a much better back than DeAndre Swift is. I understand if you're a frustrated Colts fan, but Jonathan Taylor is a very, very, very good running back. And so the fact that Detroit could hold him to 35 yards, it just doesn't give me a lot of hope for DeAndre Swift. And then we also talked about DJ Moore. Yes, on yesterday's episode, I guess we talked about Swift as well, but we talked about DJ Moore and the fact that he has seen 9 screen passes in the past 2 weeks. And I think that hurts DeAndre Swift because I think they're using that as an extension of the run game. They're using that as an extension of Swift's receiving, but it's moving to DJ Moore, who's, we overuse it. It's not the Debo-esque role, right? I think Debo is so unique in what he did, but it's kind of that wide back is how they're using DJ Moore. And I think that probably hurts Swift more than anything.
Yeah, Detroit is one of 4 teams in the league that are holding teams to under 100 rushing yards a game when playing at home. The other 3 teams, Kansas City, Minnesota, and Baltimore. Yes, we've known this for a while, but Detroit is an elite run defense. Your only hope is that DeAndre Swift can give you like 4 or 5 receptions, which like he's done before this year. But even at that, like there's just no telling of like how, where those receptions go, right? Like they could finish up with 12 yards like we've seen with other running backs this year. It is not worth trying to fit him into your lineup. It's definitely a pivotal move to, what am I trying to say? You can pivot from DeAndre Swift this week.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, especially in a week, like we've said before at the beginning of the episode, where every team is playing. So you should have everybody on your bench available. I think, like if he's probably in your flex spot. That's probably where he is unless you sustained a huge injury and he's had to move up to your running back 2 spot. And I would look at quite a few wide receivers over top DeAndre Swift this week. All right, before we get to our wide receiver and tight end starts and sits, we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back. We got some wide receiver starts, some wide receiver sits, and then we got our tight ends. They are, they just have to be here. It's like an obligation. It's the Marshawn Lynch. We just don't want to get fined kind of a thing to have tight ends in this episode. But we will spend a little more time on the wide receivers. So, Ty, why don't you start us with your wide receiver start?
It's Khalil Shakir, and it sounds like it's an obscure name that kind of rhymes a little bit. I'm a poet, didn't even know it. With Shakir, I think it's a bit of a riskier play with the Bills coming off of their bye week. Could we see more Amari Cooper, right? Guy that has been battling injuries, hasn't really in my opinion at least, hasn't really settled into Buffalo just yet. Do we see more Keon Coleman? Is he healthy, right? And do we get, is there a second half of the year rookie bump from Keon Coleman? Do we see more Dalton Kincaid? Because it's been very few and far between good performances for Dalton Kincaid. So there's a lot of what ifs and hypotheticals that we could run with this Buffalo team coming off their bye week. But for how Khalil Shakir has done this year, I'm willing to give him a shot. This week, he only has 1 game under double-digit fantasy points, so he's been steady. He doesn't necessarily have a high ceiling, but he's been giving you points every single week, right? So he is the perfect wide receiver to play if you've got a bunch of different kind of high upside guys, but also really low floor players. Khalil Shakir is definitely the guy that you should fire up with them. In his last 5 games before the bye week, Khalil Shakir was 18th in first read share. He was 19th in target share, and he was 24th in yards per route run. So the production and the efficiency was all lining up for him. So again, there's a lot of what ifs, hypotheticals coming off of the bye week. A lot of things can change for this Buffalo team, but I'm willing to give it a shot this week just because of how involved and how good he has been in this Buffalo offense.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. And he plays in the slot. I think that's the benefit. Even if Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman come back and look good, they're not taking over his role. The worry would be maybe if they start using Kincaid more in the slot, but I don't know why you would with Shakir playing as good as he has been, because he's 11th in slot snaps, but he's 12th in target rate right now at 28%, because he's only playing about 60% of snaps, similar to kind of Jaden Reed, where they're not playing, 11 personnel all the time. They're playing mainly 12 personnel. But when they are in 11 personnel, Khalil Shakir is being used. He's 2nd in yards after catch. He's 11th in yards per route run right now. And, Josh Allen's going to continue to use him because he's kind of been that safety blanket with his ADOT, only at 3.6. So I don't really see his role going away, even if Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman come out and look a lot better. So I would agree. I think Khalil Shakir is a very good start this week. I'm going to go with Davante Adams because I think people are losing some faith in Davante Adams, and I don't really blame them. The Jets have been a circus, and that's the biggest compliment I can give them, because any other adjective or word I'd use to describe them has to be worse than that, right? That's the best way you can, best light you can put them in right now. But for Davante Adams, in the 3 games leading up to the bye, he was 3rd in the league in targets, tied with Cooper Kupp with 31 in those 3 games. He was 13th in air yard share, ahead of Garrett Wilson. He was 4th in targets per route run and 5th in yards after catch. So Aaron Rodgers was starting to use him a lot more. It just wasn't necessarily translating to fantasy production. But if we know anything about Rodgers and Davante Adams, is I do think they can kind of turn it on. And the reason I think they're going to is we've heard, they're going to shut Rodgers down, put him on IR. They're done with him for the season. Rodgers is playing to protect his legacy at this point. He's playing so that you don't remember him as the guy who just crumpled his last 2 years in the league. He doesn't care about winning. He cares about, I need to put up enough stats and look good enough to finish out this season that people don't have this tainted memory of me. And I think the way he does that is by utilizing Davante Adams, who he requested to bring over from the Raiders. And then they play Seattle, who's allowing over 2 yards per route run to outside wide receivers this season. They're kind of a middle of the pack matchup, right? They're not fantastic, but they're not bad against fantasy wide receivers. So I think the volume in this one is going to be enough that I would have confidence starting Davante Adams.
Yeah, the Seattle defense, admittedly, is playing better since their bye week. They are allowing the seventh fewest passing yards per game, which I think that's in part because they are getting healthier on the defensive side of the ball. So you may see that and go like, do I really trust the Jets then against Seattle? The thing is, if Rodgers throws for 200 yards, Davante and Garrett Wilson can finish with 100 each, right? Like that's the thing. We can't sit here and say like it's a shutdown matchup, because if Rodgers throws for 150, Davante can get 50% of those yards as well. So there really is no reason to be like, I don't really like the matchup, because regardless of who they play, Rodgers has to throw to Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams. Has to. So I think it's fair to lower expectations just based on what we saw. But like you said, with his air yard share and the targets per route run and yards after the catch, there is still enough reason for you to keep him in your lineup. I definitely think I did my rankings before we did this. He is currently my wide receiver 30 on the week. That's just because there is a lower floor, but at the same time, he can't finish as a wide receiver 2 on the week because of the Rodgers connection.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's talk some wide receiver sits. And Ty, we got some boom bust guys for our wide receiver sets. I think we both went kind of the same avenue on this one, so I'll let you start with yours.
Jameson Williams, he's been solid as of late. He's the wide receiver 13 the last 3 weeks and wide receiver 19 on a per game basis. But that is on the back of one game against Jacksonville. In the other 2 games, he put up 11.8 and 8.3. So it's not like it's a brutal floor, right? Where, you know, obviously in the first 2 seasons of Jameson Williams, we were seeing 0 points or 2 points, right? That's not the floor that we've been seeing with Jameson Williams as of late. But this Chicago matchup worries me just a little bit. They are currently 9th in EPA per pass. They are 10th in EPA per play. So they are one of the better defensive units in the league. It's just a tough matchup for a boom bust wide receiver. It makes him a sit for me this week. If you want to take the shot, you can. I just know my preference. I would not take the risk with Jameson this week.
Yeah, like you said, Bears have been playing well enough. Obviously, like you said, Jordan Addison played pretty well last week, but it's just, do we trust JMO to get a 60-yard touchdown? That's what it comes down to. And it's like, do you really want to bank on that for your week? I guess you can. I would choose not to. That's kind of the way I would go about it. Because those first 2 weeks we were so excited. We thought, hey, JMO's going to be used all over the field, right? That they're changing the role, and he's kind of been relegated back to just the boom bust. Hopefully you get a long touchdown out of him kind of guy.
Yeah, and we also know about Detroit that they do not like adjust their game plan to the weakness of their defense. Detroit has their style of play. It is run it on the ground, beat you with Montgomery, beat you with Gibbs, and then find Amon-Ra St. Brown in the short and in middle parts of the field. Like you said, you need a big explosive play from Jameson Williams, right? 60-yard touchdown, 50-yard touchdown. Yeah, there's a chance of it happening, but I'm just hedging my bets against it.
I'm going with probably an easy one, Ty. I'm just so sick of having my wide receiver sets absolutely pop off, right? I picked Jacoby Myers last week, and Pat Surtain can't even stay in front of him. So I am going to go with Cedric Tillman on this. I know week 7 through 9 were so much fun. 18, 28.9, 19.5. he comes back off of those games, and we'll realize, hey, you know what? Jerry Jeudy might be the guy in this offense that you actually should trust. He's had 8 and 4 targets in those last 2 games, and now, gets Denver this week. I'm trusting in this Denver defense as a whole. I think that they are, I think they're still such a solid unit that the guy who's going to be the second target, to Elijah Moore and David Njoku, he was the 4th target against Pittsburgh. I just don't want to trust the shuffling going on. I don't think this is a great matchup for any of the Broncos wide receivers, right? If you're trying to trust Jerry Jeudy, even, I still don't think it's a great matchup for him. I think at this point, I'm moving away from Cedric Tillman. I think it was a fun 3 weeks, but again, it comes off the back of great volume, but also, he had 3 touchdowns in those 3 weeks to really propel him to some good finishes. So I'm staying away from Tillman in this one. And, just especially like we said, again, you got enough options where Tillman definitely was not in your top 4 wide receivers that I think you should be able to pivot.
Yeah. Just to name some wide receivers that I think people would put in a similar tier to Cedric Tillman in terms of like, well, look at what Tillman has done, but we would much rather roll with this week. I mean, Khalil Shakir, one, obviously, I think that one might be a little obvious, but like Jordan Addison would roll with Addison. Amari Cooper would roll with Amari Cooper. Rome Odunze, I would roll I would roll with Rome. I would even play Jameson Williams over Cedric Tillman, and Jameson was my sit, right? So I agree with you. This Denver, the Denver defense. I just don't want to take that kind of risk with a guy that could, like you said, be the 4th option in that passing attack.
Definitely. I have forgotten, Ty, we have a jersey giveaway going on through Thanksgiving. So you'll have 24 hours when this is posted to sign up on Pickett. It's completely free. Use the code fellas when you do. If you're wondering what Pickett is, Pikkit, they are a way to track your DFS, your betting, whatever you use for us underdog plays, so that you can see, hey, am I actually up units? Am I down units? Most people who actually want to do well like it. Some of the more degenerates want to stay away because it just shows their calendar is all red. So I understand, but it is free to sign up for. And when you do and use the code fellas, you're signed up for an opportunity to win a CeeDee Lamb jersey. But Ty, we have some tight ends now. We got some starts, we got some sits. So who is your tight end start this week?
I'm rolling with Tucker Kraft. I think Tucker Kraft is one of the sneakiest tight end plays that you can have this week with every team playing. Miami over the last 2 weeks have been Swiss cheese to tight ends. I mean, we got Brock Bowers, but then we had Austin Hooper and Hunter Henry, right? Like tight ends that I think most people would be like, yeah, Tucker Kraft is probably better than Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. With Romeo Doubs, I will say doubtful for this week because of the concussion that he picked up. Tucker Kraft has been the biggest beneficiary of a starting wide receiver missing time in this Green Bay offense this year. His best games have come again when a starting receiver is out because of an injury. Christian Watson left week 4 with an injury, and Tucker Kraft finished that game that week as the tight end 1 overall. And then the following week with no Christian Watson and no Romeo Doubs, he also finishes the tight end 1 again. So I think, again, based on the matchup that we have with Miami and how brutally bad they are against tight ends as of late, with the opportunity that he now has, I think Tucker Kraft, again, very, very sneaky start.
Yes, definitely don't hate that at all. My start of the week is Hunter Henry. And you know what? It's just because I like the stack with Drake May as my starter quarterback. That's really the only reason. No, Indianapolis is allowing the 8th most points to tight ends on the season. And since Drake May took over, Hunter Henry's averaging 11 fantasy points a game, has been very steady, seeing, consistent volume week after week. That if you're looking for a plug and play option, I think he's a great guy to go to because he really doesn't kill you, right? He's had one game under 7 fantasy points where he put up 2 against Chicago. But other than that game, since Drake May, 5, 9, 6, 8, 9, 8 targets. So We're seeing consistent volume go his way. And then obviously, like any tight end, if he scores a touchdown, you got that extra upside. And Ty, you're just coming right after me with this tight end sit. So who do you got?
It's Kyle Pitts.
Gross.
Ooh, boy. I know the people hate that one. But here's the fact. He hasn't hit double-digit fantasy points in the last month. Okay. And I know that they just had the bye week, so it's technically just 3 games. But he hadn't hit double digits in any of those games. If you had to take a guess of where he ranks in terms of usage in the last month, though, where would you guess?
Oh, like way down. Something stupid.
Yes, it's very stupid. Considering that like Taysom Hill is like the tight end 6 in usage.
Oh no.
Kyle Pitts is the tight end 39.
Oh no. Oh no.
You pivot. In the terms of in the words of Ross from Friends, pivot off of Kyle Pitts. There is no reason to have Kyle Pitts in your lineup at this point.
I don't get it. What happened to Kyle Pitts? We had that stretch in the middle of the season. Tight end 6, tight end 13, 10-2, and it's just gross now.
You want to know my theory on this?
I do.
What month since Kirk Cousins is the quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons, what was the best month of Kirk Cousins football when he was in Minnesota?
October. Kirktober.
All of those games were in October.
That
is very much fan theory. There is no like statistical analysis behind it, but I'm just like, hey, Kirk was balling out in October like he usually does, and Kyle Pitts was benefiting from it, and we've come back down to earth.
Definitely. My guy is Cole Kmet. I know he had 13 fantasy points last week. He did have 10 targets. But what worries me is Detroit's line 5.6 fantasy points, 2 tight ends per game, which is really bad. Or I guess really good for their defense, really bad for their opponents. And DJ Moore, Odunze, and Keenan Allen combined for 32 targets last game, right? I don't think Caleb's going to throw the ball. I think he threw it 46 times against Minnesota. I don't think that happens again. I don't think Kmet sees 10 targets. I think we see a return to the 3 or 4 that we've been seeing prior to last week.
Yep.
Well, that wraps it up for us on our starts and sits. We hope that you enjoy your Thanksgiving. We hope that you enjoy having 3 football games on Thursday, having a football game on Friday, having football games all day Sunday, and another one on Monday. We hope that you are joining the fellowship so that we can be thankful for your support. We're thankful for your support anyway. If you've made it this long,
for your viewership.
Yes. If you've made it this long, we are very thankful for your support. But we hope that you win this week. We hope that you're putting yourself in that spot or in the playoffs, that you're getting there, that we could help you win a fantasy championship. But with that, if you want to follow us on the socials, I'm at Camel FFF on the X. Tyler's at Tyler_Plath. FFLs for our main page. The FFLs on Instagram. Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts on YouTube for our short form content. Fantasy Football Fellas for our long form YouTube, which is right here. Facebook and TikTok. I think that wraps everything up. But we will see you next week after our longer than normal break. Deuces.